and thank you for joining us on Charting the Way Forward, where we deliver research-informed strategy and intelligence from across the Democratic coalition. This podcast is produced by Way to Win. I'm your host, Kerry and today I am joined by
Dan Ancona. I am the person who watches the ads and the creator and designer and coder and analyzer of TV Congress.
All right. And TV Congress will be the topic of what we're doing today, but let's get back to that in a second. We also have a very special guest, writer, researcher, and author of the excellent independent newsletter, Chaotic Era, covering politics, media, and online influence, Kyle Tharp. Welcome, Kyle.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to dig in.
All right. Kyle got the very first crack at tooling around Way to Win's very own 2024 TV Congress report, an extensive interactive database featuring all the broadcast TV advertising by the parties, campaigns, and affiliated PACs in the 2024 cycle in federal races at the presidential, Senate, and congressional levels. That deep dive database was spearheaded by Dan, which is why we also have him on. And so today we're going to unpack some of the findings for you, listen to some ads, chew over some of the differences between how the parties approach the cycle. But before we dig in, I just want to note that we spend a lot of time here on this podcast talking about the GOP advantage in terms of reach, their extensive media ecosystem, culture first podcasts, and the like. Today, we are leaning into the more traditional realm of advertising and messaging that still has a sizable impact and footprint in elections. So in federal races, TV ad spending accounted for about $3.5 billion of the roughly $11 billion spent in political advertising during the 2024 cycle. So it's definitely not chump change. Like, this is real money, real effort. So, Kyle, you often specialize in deciphering what's happening in the online world. It made me wonder, when you were tooling around on this database, what caught your eye about the database of more like traditional persuasion tools?
Yeah, of course. I think the first thing that really surprised me, it's just like a really super useful, neat tool to understand what happened last year. But what really surprised me, number one, was just the sheer scale of investment, particularly when it comes to television ad spending. I mean, the fact that campaigns in the year of our Lord 2025 are still spending that much money on old school broadcast and cable television advertising is wild. When we looked at the numbers, just the media mix for the outside groups in the Harris campaign, so the bulk of Democratic presidential spending, I found TV ad spending was almost 50% of the total media mix budget, which is just wild. And for context, and why that matters, is only around 20% of TV watchers watch television on broadcast, and something like 24% watch traditional cable. And so when those TV watchers on those traditional channels are watching ads, or they see them, they often mute the TV, change the channel, or leave the room. So campaigns are spending so much money on this sort of antiquated tactic. But as I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit, there's a lot of other reasons for that. And being able to see sort of how the campaign played out on TV is really useful moving forward.
Sure. Okay. And Dan, now you've produced several of these reports. Have you produced one other or two other? The 2020 cycle and now the 2024? Or?
We did 2020 and then we did 2022, and it's gotten, this year's report is pretty similar to the 2022 one. So we use kind of the code base.
I mean, it's, just to be clear, it's a massive, massive undertaking. So, Dan's like, I'm doing TV. When Dan says I'm doing TV Congress, I'm like, Godspeed, Dan. We'll see you in like 3 months. Anyway, what struck you about Democratic versus Republican spending this cycle?
Sure. Well, So I think the first thing is like, and Kyle has like given us those great insights, and I'm so glad that we're doing the podcast now, right? And having a chance to talk about this, because we got really great coverage of it in 2020. Greg Sargent wrote this great article that like had insights that we didn't even really have, kind of the same way that Kyle did. So it's such a great chance to like work with smart people and like get their input too. And now we can have this whole conversation about it, which is even better. I think the thing that I'm struck by is like the total numbers, that Kyle flagged and the mix, which we don't really have the mix data, right? Like this is just, we get this data from Ad Impact. It's cable, it's connected TV, it's some streaming stuff, most of the streaming digital stuff through Facebook and Google. And then, and it's some broadcast, a good chunk of it's still broadcast. But that just the fact that Democrats in the total spend over everything, that they spent 6% more, they spent almost 18% more at the presidential level. They spent 1% less at the Senate level, which is sort of interesting. And they spent 40% more at the House level to get clobbered. And like, this is like, I don't know about clobbered, underperformed for sure. I think they've told
underperform, I think is probably,
sure, right. And I think, in whatever 28% right track or whatever environment, like, like of course the party that, is in power is going to have a hard time. But just the fact that they're spending more and it's not working out is the like, that's to me, that's sort of the central thing. And in thinking about this, like I was struck, and this was just my sort of 5 a.m. sort of thinking, even just today, about, so besides doing all the code for this, like I spent a lot of time just sitting and watching the ads, and I came up with new reports even to just sit and watch the ads this time. Like there's a new report up there that has, in fact, even since Kyle wrote his super good piece about it in Chaotic Era in his newsletter, where it just takes the top 7 ads by creative, not by buy, because if you look in the database itself, it's the buys, it's whatever the biggest buys were, which is one way of analyzing it. This looked across the creatives, and it's not perfect because some of the creatives have slightly different names. I'll talk about this in a minute. But I did the sort of the message box, right? So the Democratic positive, Democratic negative in contrast, and then the Republican positive, Republican negative in contrast for them, ordered by what creatives got spent the most on. So this report is up on the website, waytowin.us/TV Congress. We'll post, if you're seeing this from online, we'll have it up there on our Blue Sky account, so that people can go look at it. But
yeah, when we tweet out the pod, we'll thread it in our Blue Sky account, so you can find it there too.
It, like, what I was really struck by from watching all these ads was overall, there's Josh Marshall said this in like 2000, it was before 2009. I just looked it up really quickly and I found a reference to it. Josh Marshall has been saying for years, 2009, that DC is wired for Republicans, right? And he was mostly talking about the press and the media apparatus and the focus of DC. And what I feel like has happened now is that, like, the Democratic Party has to some degree been also oriented around Republicans, right? Like the top spending ad was an ad by Future Forward that was $44 million that features a Republican guy. And it's like, like I can see how this ad, like across voters, was effective.
Okay. Wait, let me just slow you down.
Am I jumping in too much?
It was no, it was. I just want to make sure people understand Future Forward was a pro-Harris PAC. It was the biggest PAC that supported Kamala Harris. So they had they ended up spending $1 billion overall. Isn't that true?
Yeah, something 900 million.
Something. It was 900 million. It was a massive amount of money, but they were the main pro-Harris PAC. I just wanted people to be clear about what Future Forward was. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. So that and there was another ad that was very focused on bipartisanship. That was the Harris campaign. That was like the second time. This is like in the Democratic positive column on this report, right? Like that was the focus of the report. Now, there was a lot of spending on abortion, right? But if you look at these ads, and I'm starting to jump ahead of here a little bit, we're gonna dive into some of these narrative ads, and I think this will illustrate this. But what the ads, when we talk about the narrative and economy, I think we'll get at this. But what I was thinking about this morning was an ad. I don't think I'm gonna play it. Like maybe I'll include a clip to it. But there was an ad, one of the best ads, I think, that just hit the hardest was the America the Beautiful ad that Obama ran against Romney in 2012. Mm-hmm. And it was if people remember this, it was Mitt Romney at some point was singing America the Beautiful. It was like sweet in a way, but weird too, like Romney was. And it was overlaid with all the outsourcing that his like private equity firm had done, right? It was a savage ad, right? And like there was no way you could watch this ad and think that like oh, Romney's better for the economy, right? And there was just a case that got made. So many people on the left have said, oh, Dems, the problem is that they need to moderate. If they moderate more, if we return to the moderate positions that Obama had on social issues, we would just win, right? I don't think that's why Obama won. Like, Obama won because, like, that was a sharp elbow, right? Like, he threw a punch there, you know? Like, that was a really, really good ad. And somehow we'll get into this. As dear listeners, as you're watching this episode, as you're listening to these ads, you know, decide if you think that the case was made as effectively as that. You know, like, we have our conclusion, but we're just going to throw out a lot of the data and throw out some of these ads and talk about it and see what you think.
Well, okay, exactly. We're about to roll ads, and what we'll do is, for a lot of these, we'll tell you, you know, what the basic overall theme was, and then we'll run a Harris ad and we'll run a Trump ad. So it will be Harris first, Trump next, and you can listen to them back to back, which is also quite illuminating. And I will say for myself, because I wrote about politics for 2 decades and covered a lot of Democratic ads. And what I rarely did was watch them back to back with Republican ads. And there's something about watching it that way. You suspend how much you despise Donald Trump and Republicans when you're listening to these ads, and try to feel whether or not you think they have an emotional pull, even if you kind of, you know, despise the fact that they're trying to play on your heartstrings here a little bit. So the first theme that we're going to go is just with like a big picture narratives that each campaign, Harris for president and Trump for president, they were pushing to relay their vision for America. So let's roll those 2 and we'll hear them back to back.
Right. And I just want to just emphasize what Kerry said here. Like, I think, like, trying to approach these with beginner's mind, you know, we're finding out that a lot of low information budgets are not that low information. They're paying plenty of attention. They're just disgusted with everything, right? So try to put yourself in that mindset, or someone who's not paying super attention, but that's, you know, if you're listening to this, you're probably a pretty high information voter and you're probably not that disgusted, but there's a lot of people that are. So, all right, I'll start this.
About 2 very different visions for our nation. One focused on the future, and the other focused on the past. When the middle class is strong, America is strong. Lowering the cost of living will be a defining goal of my presidency. I'll lower the cost of insulin and prescription drugs for everyone, and I will work to pass the first ever federal ban on price gouging on food. More than 100 million Americans will get a tax cut. We will end America's housing shortage by building 3 million new homes and rentals that are affordable for the middle class. Together, we will build an economy where everyone can compete and have a real chance to succeed. Now is the time to chart a new way forward. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
You are advertising.
4 years ago, we took a wrong turn and lost our purpose. We lost the strength that makes Americans who we are. If we dared to speak the truth, it was called hate speech, and our values were labeled shameful. That's when everything we care about fell apart. We surrendered our borders, our paychecks, and our courage. Our patriotism was called toxic. Men could beat up women and win medals, but there was no prize for the guy who got up every day to do his job. Now we're being asked to settle for the way things are. And we're wondering if America can make a comeback. We can, because we've done it before. When we get knocked down, we don't stay down, we get up again. We fight. We fight. We fight.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I'm...
Okay, he approved that message. And as host of a podcast called Charting the Way Forward, which was mentioned at the end of, I was like, we got a shout out at the end of the Harris campaign.
So
I
can we talk about that for a second? Right. Jennifer caught this earlier because she was going through these, and she was like, did you realize that it was the name of our podcast was in that script? We were naming it around the same time. Like, I think we came up with this.
I literally, I think we came up with this name before them, but I don't know. But I heard it in the script, and I was like, oh my God, we literally named it.
Weird,
But anyway, okay. So
not the main point, but interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So Dan, what jumps out to you there when you listen to those back to back?
Sure. I mean, I have a list. I'll try to keep it small. I mean, so just a little context that the two different visions ad was one of the first. It might have been the first, but I forget. I didn't go back and look exactly when the handover was. It was one of the first big ads that launched after her announcement, and it kind of ran from like the buy started in like early mid September, like the 9th until early October. So that was like their setup narrative ad, right? And I really actually I think that's really strong. There's just a little production note. There's like a crowd noise thing in there, which we'll see later in some Trump ads that I feel like is really effective. It's sort of, there's like a social proof kind of a vibe to it that like you think that it's energy, it's interesting. My only concern with it, and this is going to be a theme here, is that I don't know that issue payload in the middle of it was really the thing. Like there's a lot on like middle class tax cuts, middle class. We had focus groups where we literally had a guy say that. He was like, middle class, right? Like there was so much repetition of that it felt like to him other things were getting left out. Poor people, right? Which people on our side care about, there was some of that on the Republican ad. Trying to read my notes here. There was there's the line. I mean, some of it like is ridiculous, right? Like that's one of the things that jumps out at me is like 4 years ago, that's when everything fell apart. Like, what? We elected Biden and then everything immediately went to shit. Like, no, like sometimes I think these lines are so ridiculous that I'm like surprised that they work or that they like made it through an edit. But I think that kind of hyperbole maybe is effective, at least for some people.
Well, I think if you're looking at the wrong track numbers, which were horrible at the time,
sure,
it like kind of vibes off of what people are generally feeling without it needing to be like an exact, precise reflection.
Maybe kind of like I don't know. I just it's just fascinating, right? And that doesn't. I don't know, or maybe I don't know. I don't know how a line like that lands. It's interesting, but it was also followed by a line that I think was genuinely brilliant. Like, there's no prize for the guy who gets up and works every morning, with a picture of a person of color, right? Like with just an image, and like this is another sort of theme. Is I feel like the way that they handle diversity in their ads generally was super, super sophisticated, and kind of, honestly, I got to say, more sophisticated than our approach.
I'm glad that you played this combo of ads, because I feel like that Harris ad really encompasses everything that the Harris campaign tried to do in their paid media strategy last year. And basically that is just present a massive laundry list of things that everyone could possibly like. So it's like, all right, we're talking about insulin. And it's like, well, you lost me because I don't need insulin, but like maybe my grandma does. And then it's like, oh, now we're going to pivot to housing. And then, oh, let's talk about like middle class tax cuts for 200 or 100 million Americans, which means 200 million Americans are not getting tax cuts. And it's just like, okay, like you're just like throwing everything you have at me. And what I really saw the difference between those two ads was the Harris ad was really talking at the viewer, where the Trump ad was talking to and with the viewer in a way that was like, I'm talking directly to you, like talking about your life. Whereas she was like, here's everything that I'm going to do. Hope you like it.
Yeah. Interesting too that it was her narrating versus a third person narrative, right? Or a third person narrator. Like not this. And there are ads that have Trump sound or Trump narrating. I think less overall. Yeah.
So,
there's data on that. But.
What Kyle said, touched on here, is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And it's like something that I've seen now that I can't unsee about the whole campaign and the Harris approach, right? And when we had Dan Pfeiffer on several episodes ago, and he talked about how the campaign was all trees, no forest, right? Yeah. It was a litany of policies with no cohesive vision. If you listen to that, she starts out with a vision, forward versus back. And then it just goes into, and to be fair, she got picked out of the blue at the very last second and had to come up with a biography and a reason for her candidacy and whatever. But then everything just dissolves into a litany of policies. And if you listen to Trump's, it's an emotional, values-based appeal to people. And to Dan's point, it doesn't mean that everything makes perfect sense, but I think that the line he pointed out about there's no prize for the guy who gets up every morning. I mean, that is just a genius line that everybody's like, that's so true. I get up every morning and man, I can just barely make ends meet. I'm just getting killed by the economy or inflation or whatever. So anyway,
what that reminds me of, Kerry, and like I know we got a lot of territory to cover here, but there was Will Robinson wrote a thing recently. Will Robinson is a media consultant and ad maker and genius guy, of the old school, but not of old school, but not of the old school. And he's just super great. And he's writing I forget what his Substack is called. It's worth looking up. He wrote a thing about resonance and about how good ads, they find a resonance surface and they hit that and they pluck that string. Like that line alone is like boing, you can just feel that working with people.
Yeah. One thing we should mention before moving on, and that I think, Kerry, you touched on, but these ads aren't just it's really easy to watch them in a vacuum now. But back then when Harris first ran that ad, we talked about how it's overly packed with policy stuff. She was getting crushed by the mainstream media for not having a policy agenda. Oh, what does she stand for? We don't even know what she stands for. So here she is being down to the insulin level of policy. And I'm sure the team really thought that through.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's true.
Totally. Okay, that's a great point. Let's move on to the economy. We're gonna take a look at these. This was. I just want to say about the economy. This was terrain that both campaigns fought for, right? In some cases, like the Trump campaign fought a lot harder for the immigration terrain, and obviously the Harris campaign fought a lot harder for the abortion terrain. But on economy, they were both going for it. So let's play these two ads back to back.
And this is, if you look at the I don't have the spend. I didn't grab those particular spending totals, but they're similar. When we get to immigration, they're not similar. We'll flag that. But yeah, all right, here they are.
There's a few things I believe. Middle-class families, like the one I grew up in, they want common sense solutions. You want lower prices and lower taxes. I believe you want to just not get by, but you want to get ahead. We must create an opportunity economy where everyone has a chance to get a car loan, buy a home, start a business. But most of all, that instead of being focused on the politics of the past, we need to be thinking about the future. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
One man believes in no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, and now, no tax on overtime.
The people who work overtime are among the hardest working citizens in our country. And for too long, no one in Washington has been looking out for them.
And one man will refuse to fall. So America and its workers can continue to stand great again.
Right for America is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Okay, so that was the first one was from Harris for President. The other one was from Right for America PAC. Kyle, were you drawn to one over the other?
Yeah, honestly, I thought the Harris ad was pretty strong in this regard, particularly for specifically calling out things like being able to afford a car loan, buy a home, start a business. I get really jaded by a lot of the buzzwords that are used in this type of advertising. Like Dan said, middle class. But I thought hers was strong, and I think the Trump stuff, I don't know, it didn't really do it for me.
Interesting. I thought the Trump ad was so good, but
I did too.
I want to say this because in watching especially with you all, I really like that opportunity ad too. I just want to say, if people are listening to this, if people are work for the Harris campaign or work for Future Forward or whatever, I just want you to know, this critique is loving. Okay, we know this is really hard. We make ads ourselves. We know how hard it is to make these things, right? So this is. I don't think anybody did a bad job here, right? But there's, I mean, I think there's some decisions that I'm not, that in retrospect now we can ask questions about, right? But like that's all of these things. Like I can understand what people were trying to accomplish, right? Like I can understand what people were trying to do with that.
The pressure cooker they were dealing with based on completely unprecedented situation. I mean, everyone's fumbling around within, 10 or 15 days of that thing, trying to figure out how we get an ad out that relays the reason for her candidacy. And that is just so, because our guy stayed in too long and really, didn't have his faculties. I mean, that's just a bum starting point, right? So anyway.
Well, one thing I saw in her messaging in that ad is like trying to talk about how things are expensive without saying things are expensive, because she doesn't want to have daylight between her and the administration. And so like, it would be much more effective if she's like, hey, y'all, shit's very expensive. And like, I want to help you get ahead. But instead, she isn't able to do that.
Yeah. This is tricky because there was one ad, and I don't know if I have it. I don't know if I remember seeing it. I remember seeing it in like while it was happening. Like I think I saw it like on a ball game or something like in October, and it was like a woman opening her fridge. It was a Harris ad or it was a Dem side ad. I don't know who made it, but she was opening the fridge and like the fridge was empty, right? Like it was just like an old carton of milk or something. And I was like, just thinking about like the Will Robinson vibe, like resonance angle of that. And I was like, is that a good message to send like for us, right? And there was a thing that they needed to do. And what I never quite understood, and I'm always on about this, is like why Harris, Biden, all the Dems never said, we get things are hard. We are fighting like crazy for change. The system is super broken. Like we are trying to fix it. We are doing good things for you. I don't think that case is that hard to make. They didn't. I mean, and maybe maybe there's stuff on the cutting room floor. I don't know. Someday maybe we'll have some of the Future Forward people on or something, and they'll be like, yeah, we actually tried to make an ad like this, and this is what we got back in the testing, that it didn't work at all. But I just, her answer on The View, which we'll get to, and I think we have one of the ads around that.
I think Biden just never Biden just never showed any interest in admitting that anything was not going well under his, presidency. And I think
problems.
Yeah, right. So one thing I just want to point out that, her opening, and this is another situation where I liked her ad when I saw it alone. And then when I see it back to back with Trump's, I'm like, man, it just feels, the emotional appeal feels better to me, even though I don't like him. But her opening line in that ad was basically, here's what I believe. Middle-class families like the one I grew up in, they want common sense solutions. Okay. Now that just sounds to me like a poll test. So common sense is such a poll tested phrase, right? Trump in the middle of that, right? It's narrated by someone else. And then Trump in the middle of it comes in and says, the people who work overtime are the hardest working citizens of our country. And then you hear the crowd go wild, and it's like, that line has a similar like pivot to the one that we were talking about in the earlier, right? It has an incredible emotional appeal to it.
Yeah. It's like the same conceptual idea, but like with a like emotional like punch behind it versus a dry kind of like, middle class solutions. And opportunity is the same way, right? Like when she started talking about opportunity stuff, there's like a huge debate that we had on the like Way to Win Slack about like whether opportunity was a good thing to rely on or not. And like my issue with it always has been, is like, look, our economy is freaking brutal, and like some people will get opportunities and they'll screw up, and like they won't take those opportunities, or they won't. There's a million reasons that can go wrong, like all of us are closer to being homeless than to being billionaires, most of us at least, and like even in my life, there's things that I know that like decisions that I made that could have gone the other direction, and I would have really struggled. And like I had way more privilege than almost anyone in the world, like I could have screwed it up, it's just like, so there's larger narratives around these words and choices that are, it's hard to figure out. And
I just want to say, speak for yourself, Dan, because all of my financial decisions over the years have been Spot on. Perfect.
Perfectly on point. Chose to work in an extremely well compensated field of, progressive organizing and media.
Yeah. Yeah. Being a journalist for 20 years was just the best idea ever.
Definitely
So,
financially motivated. Right.
okay, let's move on to immigration. Let's roll Harris then Trump on immigration. The first one is from Harris for president, and the second one was done by MAGA Inc.
Kamala Harris has spent decades fighting violent crime. As a border state prosecutor, she took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for smuggling weapons and drugs across the border. As vice president, she backed the toughest border control bill in decades. And as president, she will hire thousands more border agents and crack down on fentanyl and human trafficking. Fixing the border is tough. So is Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Had 3.5 years to fix the border. Why hasn't she done it?
4 years, radical Kamala Harris created the border crisis. Thousands of accused murderers, rapists, even terrorists pour in. Each crime they commit makes American victims. Innocent victims of Kamala's open border agenda. They were bludgeoned, raped, strangled, stabbed, shot, and murdered. Kamala created the border crisis. She won't fix it now. Make America Great Again, Inc. is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Woo! Bludgeoned, raped, murdered,
Kamala
stabbed.
single-handedly created the border crisis. It was all her. As vice president, Kamala created the border.
I'm like a major skeptic of this genre of advertising. I think it's so nasty and dark that like no one wants to watch it. They change the channel, they mute the channel, and then they just say, oh, politics is dirty and mean and terrible. Like I just don't see a real value here. I wrote about in the newsletter that there's a much bigger narrative value about what's in these ads that we can talk about later that happens in the press. But this isn't doing it.
Yeah. I think the problem is when they get people to like revulsion, right, is their goal, right? I think that's actually the emotional target that they're trying to hit in an ad like this. I think they win when that happens, right? I think when someone is so disgusted by, this is like so much of what we hear from like we did this. I keep talking about this. I don't know if you heard this episode. We did a couple episodes. We did a focus group, and then we had sound of Biden 2020 voters that skipped in 2024, right? So not strong Democrats mostly. They all leaned down for the most part, but they, in that we had, like a lot of quotes from people who were just disgusted, right? And like I think like this kind of like super over the top. My favorite line in this one is bludgeoned, raped, murdered, dragged across the coals, whatever, like super, super ridiculous. But I think that I'm turning this off is like exactly the signal. They spent I forget this was okay. The other thing about this, just context for these, the Harris ad was, I think they spent $4 million on that one. That was maybe the top immigration ad. They spent $8 million total on immigration. I forget what I want to say. I have the number here somewhere. It was 240 million or something for the Republican immigration ad. So it was almost 10x, right, of what 100x, whatever, like a lot more, right, that was spent. So this was like for the most part. The Harris campaign spending on immigration rounded to zero. Like this was like there was no attempt.
And immigration turned out to be the most expensive issue, I think, in total. So it really drove a lot of the conversation, right? Particularly on right-wing media, but that jumped to mainstream media. And that's like a big role that these ads play when these ads, particularly ones on immigration and other things that the right focused on, are being talked about all the time in the press. A lot of times viewers are not even seeing the ads, but they're instead just seeing coverage or clips on social media or in the press. And it makes it so much of a bigger conversation.
Right. The other thing I want to mention about these two ads is, and it's something we're still dealing with today, by going after, she tries here, and this is another point that I want to credit to Dan Pfeiffer, because I don't think I would have totally noticed this, but I have noticed the problem we're still dealing with today, which is we've ceded the issue of immigration in a lot of ways to Republicans, and trying to fight on the issue of border security, where she's talking about, I was a prosecutor, I prosecuted gangs and stuff like that. That the border security frame is the frame that Donald Trump wanted to fight on. They wanted to fight immigration in the context of just border security and not the greater immigration issue of, like, how do we fix the system, and how do we, make sure that the right people are here and can get a pathway to citizenship, whereas people who are really committing violent crimes are, deported, and how can we make sure, immigrants contribute to our economy. They perform essential services. Like, that's a conversation that Democrats can have and win on if they're willing to actually prosecute the case.
Yeah.
But here, they spent, you said $8 million on this ad. She's playing right into the frame.
$8 million total. This one was about, I think this was half of it. This
was 4 million, I think, for this ad in particular. But
right.
8 more. But this ad in particular, 4 million, is all dedicated entirely to the frame that Donald Trump wanted to fight this battle on.
Well, infamously, 2028 presidential candidate Rahm Emanuel once said that immigration is the third rail of American politics. Democrats should not touch it.
Won this argument.
Unfortunately, he won because Democrats have not touched that issue in like 10 years, which is a real shame, because I think they just completely ceded every fact and every potential angle to Republicans.
Don't get me started on Rahm, because I'm very in tune with a lot of the things Rahm said, because I covered the Obama White House and he was chief of staff during the first 2 years. Yeah. And Rahm said that. And let me just remind you that then what happened was, during the 2012 re-election, Obama did deferred action for childhood arrivals. So he actually ventured into the third rail. And let me tell you, it played very well for him in his re-election. And you know what the other third rail was that Rahm Emanuel is like, whatever you don't do, don't touch this issue? LGBTQ issues. Don't ask, don't tell. He absolutely did not want that repealed. And what did Obama do in 2012? He not only repealed that, he didn't repeal it. They were the White House was kind of forced into repealing it. And he came out for same-sex marriage in 2012. Everyone said that was a death knell, flipping his same-sex marriage thing. And that helped him. Both of those things helped his reelect, both. So, all right. Sorry, I got triggered by Rahm.
For a sec. Sorry. No, because this is, it's critical. Kerry, you gave a pretty good overview of like what some of the options were. We saw this immigration thing happening in cycle, and we felt like the biggest opening was that Trump was going to be very extreme. There were people holding up mass deportation signs at the DNC, which is nuts, right? And like, we were like, this is an opening. We created an ad called Playbook that is, if you go to my Bluesky profile, you can see it. I have it pinned there because it makes me so mad that I just want to see it every time I look at my profile. And it was a really strong ad. It was one of the strongest ads that we made, that we tested. And we were super late in the cycle, right? This came out in like early October. So it was too late for us to shift. I mean, so, one of our allies could have picked this up and decided to make this an ad and run it. It was still inside the envelope of what they were talking about. It was just opposing what Trump was talking about, right? So like, it wasn't completely off kilter from like what the Harris campaign positioning. It was just emphasizing a different part of it. And, we lost that argument, and like, it's too bad. The other thing that about this sort of overall immigration spending, one of the things that we picked up in the report, and we're going to have a memo that comes out, I've been immersed in this data now, and it takes me a while to sort of get all the details down like this. The total spending on immigration from the Dem and Harris side, from all the outside groups, was about 8 million. About 4 million of that turns out, Spanish language ads that were about immigration. That my immigration or my translation skills are very rusty. I don't speak Spanish, or like, I can't really understand it, but I can kind of get the vibe of the ads. The ads are really good. They were in Spanish only though. And I forget what it is. It's 22% or something are Spanish dominant of Latinos that live in the US. and I think it's maybe less for voters, I forget, but those ads were super, super good, and I don't know why more wasn't spent in, you know, English language versions of those. And like, they were much more along the, you know, security, but also respect sort of, you know, like approach that, you know, that Kerry laid out, that I think there was a big missed opportunity there. And I don't know what the story was. I don't know why that didn't happen. But again, it was a minuscule amount of money. All the buys were like $1 million or less. And they just didn't put any effort towards it.
That's super interesting. Okay, this is kind of our last category, and it's wooing Republicans, right? So the main pro-Harris PAC, Future Forward, put nearly 40. We kind of mentioned this at the top, but they put nearly $44 million towards trying to persuade Republicans to vote for Harris. Here's
on one ad. Just to be clear, that was one ad, and
that was one ad. Sorry.
Yeah, the second most positive ad. In fact, we're going to play. Okay, so this is the two most spent on creatives in the you know, Democratic positive part of the message box. That's
right. These are both this isn't a Harris Trump thing. These are both Harris ads, and the first one was by Future Forward, and the second one was by Harris for President, and they're both sort of like, let's see if we can woo some Republicans to our side.
Right.
I'm a lifelong Republican, and I voted for Trump twice, but I can't do it again. Trump wants a national sales tax on imported goods. It'll make everything more expensive for regular people, all while giving tax breaks to billionaires.
You're rich as hell. We're going to give you tax cuts?
Kamala Harris is for regular people. She wants a tax cut for 100 million Americans, so we keep more of our hard-earned money. I'm a proud Republican, but this year, I'm voting for Kamala Harris.
FF PAC is responsible for the content of this.
Prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only thing I ever asked them, are you okay? And that's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on investing right now in you, the American people. And we can chart a new way forward. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Okay, Kyle. The two-time Trump voter, also named Kyle, was right. Trump is currently implementing a national sales tax on imported goods. So he knew he was actually onto something.
He called it. Kyle called it.
You know,
he did.
As someone named Kyle, who also used to live in Alabama, I can really relate to this man. And I think I grew up Republican. So I can relate to this. You can definitely tell in both of these that the Harris campaign, like Future Forward and the Harris campaign, have this image in their head of what the swing voter looks like and talks like, and they're definitely thinking that it's a lot more like the Kyles from Alabama, when in fact, like, white men in Alabama do not vote for Democrats. I think it's probably less than 10%. So like Kyle from Alabama is a completely imaginary person that they're trying to talk to there. And that's like my biggest problem. And it's something that Democrats do in national campaigns all the time.
Yeah. This is, I think it's occurring to me the way that you're describing this, Kyle. This is the most perfect example of median voter theory, like based politics, right? Like that guy is like, I don't know. I think the median voter is a little older than that guy, right? But they were looking at persuadables and trying to aim a little younger. Makes sense, right? But that is like, you know, like when you think of swing voters now, you know, like Cornell Belcher, we had him on 2 weeks ago to talk about who swing voters are and like about black men and how they swing and how they, you know, different groups of people vote in different elections and that kind of thing. And, you know, those are the people who, like, whether they're going to vote or not. And I know this is like the whole turnout versus persuasion thing. I don't mean to open this can of worms right now, but like, we have
buckle up, folks. We're going to spend another hour on this. No, I'm just kidding.
Put these pieces together. You know what I mean? Like that's.
All right, go ahead. Say it again.
Working across the whole coalition and like trying to understand how coalitions vote and different individual and different groups of people vote and different segments of people vote, rather than saying we need to focus. You know, that was a huge bet. It was $44 million on that one ad, right? And then another $13 million on the bipartisan ad, and that bipartisan ad was called A New Way Forward. It didn't have much about what the new way forward was at all. And again, not to tootle my own horn, but we did an ad about inequality and 50 trillion it wasn't a perfect ad. We played it for some focus groups. They weren't that into it, but like the way that we described a new way forward, we did it really succinctly in the end in like 8 seconds. And like, it was like, we're going to invest in American communities. And I forget what it said, but it was good. And like, it was like, we had a substantive way of describing it that was about returning power to people. That I think would have fit in that ad and might have helped it. But yeah, the median voter thing, I think it was a big bet, and it's not
okay. While that, not you, Kyle, but the other Kyle, the Alabama Kyle, who was the 2-time Trump voter. I don't think you're a 2-time Trump voter, Kyle. I'm just guessing. No, you want to confess? Any confessions? No. Okay. So all right. Woo. That's okay. So, but while that's still fresh in people's heads, I want to play this other. That was a, personal testimonial, similar type thing. This was not a Republican, but it was like a working dude. He's a construction worker. He's pictured for the people who are listening and not watching. He's pictured throughout, like kind of in his construction garb and whatever. And listen, it does not feel like this is forced, right? So let's go ahead and can we play that?
Yeah, no, I brought that one up. And you know what I kind of want to do, let's just do this, and then if we have a minute, I have one more that I want to play about change that kind of gets into this. But let's do this guy first. And by the way, this is from a group called Local Voices. This was a super small buy. I think it was 18 grand in Pennsylvania. They were on our radar. I think we might have even given them a little money. I forget, but anyway, I'll play it.
I consider myself a huge patriot, and being a patriot means protecting democracy, defending what's in the Constitution. When Trump refused to do the peaceful transition of power, that was my first warning sign that they're after democracy. We were at work on January 6th. I saw those people getting crazy. Officers at the Capitol being hurt. When I saw that, it would seem like democracy was dying. Enough was enough. I want someone like Kamala Harris that's going to side with common sense. That's what we should be thinking about. Not running the country down and making everybody afraid. That's why I want to vote Democrat and move everything forward. We cannot go back. I'm Dave Guncher. I'm a Cold War veteran, and I helped build the infrastructure with a lot of other fine men and women in this great state. And I am voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Why? Because they care about people like me and you, man.
Local Voices is responsible for the content.
Wow, we love Dave.
Oh, this is so good. Can I actually play this last Trump ad? Then I'm out of.
Wait, can I just say seconds? Yeah. I just want to say that was an emotional appeal ad. That was a values-based ad rather than a litany of things that Kamala was going to do or whatever. And to me, it worked better.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. And like that. I mean, we can come back to it, but like. What I love about that guy is like, I don't think that guy was a 2-time Trump voter. Like that wasn't like, I don't think that guy's ever pulled a lever for a Republican, right? Like he was like, he was a Dem. He was like one of those like I have family members like this, right? Like Midwestern people who have seen through this bullshit and like get it, and like I think telling their story and normalizing that guy is an ordinary American and he sees what's going on. That feels like a really powerful technique. Okay, so this last one is a Trump ad. I hate to leave on a depressing note, but this is reality. So,
a flood of illegals, skyrocketing prices, global chaos, and Kamala wouldn't change a thing.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
Nothing will change with Kamala. More weakness, more war, more welfare for illegals, and even more taxes. Only President Trump cut middle-class taxes, and only President Trump will do it again.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and
Yeah, I mean
that goes to your thesis. Go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, since the election, reporting has come out saying that the day of the presidential debate for Harris against Trump, Biden called her and told her, "Hey, remember, kid, like no daylight between us." And so clearly she was caught on the view, like, oh shit. It was a screw up. It was a screw up, and the campaign admitted it. And so Trump took advantage of it. That ad was a pure, negative Harris ad, and I think it worked.
Yeah. Something that jumped out at me since we've been talking about it so much was that he poaches her issue in there too. He's like, only Trump has actually cut middle class taxes, and he'll do it again, which is a fucking lie. I mean, I guess it's technically true, right? Because there was like in his tax rates, the middle class got like, they threw us a nickel, right? As they like, showered the rich with millions of dollars, right?
What the Trump
funny.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I've got a fun. Go ahead, because I've got a funny thing about the about the view appearance that I looked at.
What the Trump campaign did, A plus in this, not just this ad, but I think throughout the campaign, was take her sound and make it work against her very effectively. And Kyle, you wrote about how much peripheral, like how many the downstream impact of how many mainstream media, legacy media pieces reporting get done on missteps like this, and how it has its own proliferation. I can't get that word out, but anyway, it has that effect, right? And it was like that with the transgender, they them ad, and she didn't campaign on trans issues, but so many people in our focus groups kind of think that she was centering trans issues because, in her own words, they featured her in that ad. And so, this is something that I mean, I'm interested in hearing. I did not know that, Kyle, about Biden calling her and saying no daylight, because that hobbled her. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I mean, it's what we talked about with TV ads really having an outsized impact on the entire conversation of the election. Reporters can sometimes be lazy, and when you are a comms person on a campaign or a PAC, I've done this before, you send out a press release when you have a new ad saying, watch, we have a new ad buy going up in Pennsylvania about this issue, watch the ad. And so then it, particularly when it came to the prominent advertising around transgender issues, I think, we saw hundreds of news articles, not about Kamala's stance on trans issues, but just about the ad itself. And so, I was never served a swing state battleground TV ad featuring these things, but I saw that ad across my social media feeds, in different newspapers, whatever. And so that's the real impact of television advertising in 2025, I think, is really driving the entire conversation. It sheds light on the strategy of the senior campaign staffers, and it shows what the press is going to be writing about and talking about and asking the candidates themselves about.
Yep. So quick, I kind of want to leave it there, but I just want to run through this because I looked this up for the memo, and I think this is a good place to leave it too. That view appearance was on October 8th. Also on October 8th was the day that the second to last New York Times Siena poll came out. And it had one of the questions they asked is, which candidate is more change? There were two questions that are sort of relevant to this. The first was, do you think the system needs to change? And I have the numbers here. It was 60% said the system needs major changes, 25% needs minor changes, 12% said it should be torn down entirely, right? And then, so whatever the balance was there, 25% needed minor changes, 12% tear the whole thing down, right? So 60% said major changes. Like, that's 72 wanted major change or to nuke the thing, right? And and then they asked, which candidate do you see as more for change? And it was 46-43 in Kamala's favor. That October 8th was the day of the View interview, and it was the day that she said that. And it took the Trump campaign about a week to cut that ad. I don't know why it took them so long, but they did that ad, and that launched on October 16th. And I don't know, there were two New York Times Sienas. There was one on October 25th, also like in October. I don't know where, and they didn't ask which one's more for change. I'm sure, and this is just the Republican strategy. This is Karl Rove, right? They saw it was a strength of hers, and they attacked her on it and just went right after her, and like, instead of saying, oh, she's for change, we better make it about something else, they just ran straight at it and just pounded it.
Right. And they clearly, based on the exits and everything we've seen since, ended up winning that argument about who's for change. Right. And now we've definitely got change. There's no doubt about that. Change is happening. So it's like, you can't argue. That's true. It is true. Okay. We will leave it there. Thank you, Dan Ancona, and a special thank you to Kyle Tharp for bringing Oh,
one more thing. Let's do the three
right.
things.
3 media.
Let's do
Sorry.
it.
All right.
Yeah.
3 media things. 3 things that you're listening or watching right now, Carl. Lightning
Reading.
round.
Give me anything, any media, anything in the whole world. And 3 ads you like. I don't care, whatever.
All right. So number one, I have been watching this YouTube creator named Preston Goes, and it's a really great escape from politics because he's like an engineer and just like does like crazy solo engineering feats. Super weird. Number two, I've really been enjoying much more in the political and media lane. I've been enjoying reading Semaphore Media, which is written by Max Tanney. It's a newsletter that comes out every Sunday night, really covering changes in the media industry, but with an eye for politics and social media as well.
Was that the guy who busted the group chat story?
I'm not. No, I don't think so.
Okay,
I mean, that was a disaster. Yeah. I don't know. I think I read a lot of newsletters, so my inbox every morning is about 40 or 50 newsletters. I think.
My goodness.
I think Garbage Day by Ryan Broderick is another place that I really look forward to.
Garbage Day fan.
It's a newsletter about technology and kind of weird corners of the internet, which is helpful to understand all this stuff.
What's the group chat story you're talking about?
We'll talk about it later.
Okay. Our poor listeners are going to be like, what's the group chat? So I'm trying to clarify for listeners.
It was Semaphore broke a story about how Mark Anderson and Matt Iglesias and all these people are like on these signal chats that are like
I think that was Max Tanney. Yeah, you're right.
It might have been. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was there was a people because sometimes it seems like these stories are sort of coordinated about all the anti-woke stuff or whatever. And like they were totally coordinated because they were all in the group chat talking about it. Like,
that's fascinating. Okay. All right. We will finally leave it there. Thank you, Dan, for coming on and sharing TV Congress with us. Special thank you to Kyle Tharp for bringing your insights to this discussion. Thank you also to our listeners. You are the reason that we are here. You make us relevant. And if you appreciate us the way we definitely appreciate you, you can give us even more relevance by going and rating and reviewing Charting the Way Forward wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're at it, follow our Substack, same name, Charting the Way Forward, endorsed by Harris for President. No, I'm just kidding. In fact, later today, we will have fresh content featuring, or later, I should say, by the time you hear this, there will be fresh content on our Substack featuring all of our 2024 Skipper data to date, a virtual treasure trove of research. So have at it, go over there, Charting the Way Forward, check it out. And with that, we will see you next Thursday. Until then, do good, be well, hug your loved ones, and tell your dog I say